This afternoon you will hear some extraordinary presentations, and they're extraordinary because the world of psychic attack is an extraordinary place, and very little is known about it, except for work that has been handed down to us by very excellent people on the subject of, and I'm thinking of Dion Fortune, of course. Some of you may remember a book by Rom Lando called God is My Adventure. Very useful book because it touches on the subject quite profoundly. In it he describes how a lady friend of his complained about Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff was a very highly advanced individual, an initiate, operating on the fifth ray of concrete knowledge and analytical science, and he produced a string of teachers who followed him. This woman said that she was once seated in a crowded place and had the occasion to look over towards the direction of a very striking looking person, which afterwards turned out to be Gurdjieff. She said that he caught her gaze and looked at her profoundly, and then he began to breathe in a strange way. I think we can guess what that method of breathing was. He began to breathe in a strange way, and immediately she felt an impact in the region of her generative organs. It wasn't exactly pain and it wasn't exactly stimulus, but it was a very sustained impact. Sometimes such matters can reach consciousness, and it had in her case. That was psychic attack, nicely conveyed, of course, in a social setting. Sometimes the setting is not always quite so benign. If you are a lecturer like I am, and have to therefore talk in all kinds of places, sometimes private, sometimes public, sometimes in way out sites, you'll see what I mean in a moment. I had, this must have been 30 years ago, I had been lecturing in the home of a very nice middle-aged couple in a well-known city in the United States, and it had been a good evening, and I had ended on a very compassionate note, recommending universal love and that sort of thing. The hostess was very unhappy. I didn't know at that stage what it was about, but she was very unhappy and rather neglected by her husband. Well behaved, but it seemed to me that she, if anybody, was going through a hell on earth. And I went to bed in their home, and I suppose I'd been in bed about an hour, and I heard, must have been in an astral state of consciousness, I heard the pattering of feet coming down the passage to my bedroom. And through the door was shut, came my host, the lady, and got into bed with me. My natural revulsion awakened me, and of course I was then in the waking state, and there was nobody there, but it had definitely happened. And such things you can't even lock your door against, because it was an out-of-body experience on the part of the good lady of the house. She wanted emotional comfort, and I suppose I was the sort of person that could give it to her. There was nothing sexual in it whatever, and it taught me a lesson in future that I should pitch my image at a higher level. And professing your love for mankind should not make people take you too literally, as they sometimes do. And if you are a lecturer, you have to be very careful. Of course, hell states are not something that you should scorn. When you are spiritual, when you are esoteric, you are expected to shoulder increasing responsibility. The fact of just becoming purer, with your vibration at a higher level, undergoing psychosynthesis, reorientating of your integrated personality towards the higher self and what the higher self wants it to do, that's part and parcel of spiritual unfoldment. But it implies increased responsibility. Responsibility for mankind. And always remember, so long as you work for mankind in some way, you are orientating yourself to the highest possible consciousness. We all know that the earth itself sits within the great ring of the astral world that interpenetrates it, extending to great regions beyond the surface of the earth. We know the highest vibrations of the astral world are in the periphery of that astral world. We know that the vibrations get lower and lower and come below the surface of the earth. And there is below the surface of the earth that part of the astral world which is or constitutes the hell states. Catholicism is right in this respect. There are vibratory places below the level of the earth that have volcanic implications. And there you have those who must learn from the hell state to overcome the kind of things that hold them back. A person in hell is in hell for a particular reason. And the reason is to undergo a repetitiveness of their crime or what they are capable of. If you have decapitated somebody in ordinary life for whatever reason, and it's very rare today, but if you have decapitated somebody and you are placed in hell and to suffer for that act and to remove its effectiveness, that's not just the end of it, to undergo decapitation yourself. It is the repetitiveness of it, that the astral body replaces itself immediately. And so you may be decapitated once, and you would think that would be the end of it. But no, you are immediately restored, and again it happens, and again, and again, and again, until the effect of the treatment, as it were, the karmic treatment, is, as I say, made effective. And then it means that the end of that period in hell, the person's astral shell, which was capable of such an action, is discarded. We all of us must remember to shoulder some of the terrible things of the world, as well as to pine for the finer things in spiritual growth. And the world has got hotspots. Hotspots in politics, hotspots in social conditions, and certainly hotspots in psychic conditions. And sometimes as we grow spiritually, we shoulder our responsibilities, and if we do very well, we must be prepared to go into the hell states, for the highest opinions we know will ask that we should do that. We should go into the hell state occasionally and diffuse a hot spot there, where the tension is so tremendous that it could boil up and flush out into the social world that we know. And so going into hell and shouldering hell is part and parcel of spiritual growth. Now, you're not going to be sat down and told this nicely, kindly, as a matter of a long-term course of instruction. You have to find it out for yourself. And so some of the psychic attacks that you believe are unimaginably painful and distressing and totally unearned on your part should make you think, should make you understand that as you spiritually progress, you are expected to go down into the hell states and take up the problem of hotspots there, perhaps only for 10 or 15 minutes, enough to diffuse the tremendous tension there. Psychic attack can reach your own family, your own friends. Sometimes you are the only one to be really aware of it. I have a sister, many of you have met her, I see familiar faces here tonight. She's an old lady, and she has been through many marriages. Some people seem to be destined to. And she has gathered many engagement rings through the years. Diamonds, she believes, are a person's best friends. She complained to me once how she quite unexpectedly would have nightmare states, and she couldn't account for them. She said it was usually when she was very tired. And I went over the process of how she prepared herself for night sleep. And I decided that the best thing to do would be to project myself to her and observe what occurred when she went to sleep. And so in the astral world, I observed her, and I found that it was when she went to bed with her diamond rings on that she was the target of astral attack, that there were entities who would claw at these diamond rings in the astral world. Of course, if you wear a thing for very long, it grows, develops an astral body. That's the basis of psychometry. Any object that is an antique, which has been lying in your house and perhaps for 10 centuries elsewhere, is capable, does develop an astral counterpart, sheath, if not a body. And so an object of great devotion or love or attachment or intrinsic value, if you may call it, will develop an astral sheath and therefore is visible on you, if it is a brooch or a ring, and can attract attention. And she was being attacked by entities who had nothing but diamonds on their mind. And of course that takes you back to consider the awful background behind some of the gemstones, the jewelry that exists in the world. Not only gold things, but things like the Hope diamond, which had a very nefarious background to it. And so she realized that was so and never ever wears diamonds going to bed. And I think that is something that you should put down in your notebooks if you are ever consulted about psychic attack. Psychic attack is comparatively rare. You will see later on who are attacked psychically. Invariably, it is a person who has something to give. Yes, perhaps sexually, but more often than not, it is a person who has a tremendous amount of excessive energy. These high states that you sometimes see kids in, that makes them susceptible to astral attack. It is the energy that a person or an entity gives off that is wanted by the psychic entity, to draw on that energy. I had a friend, he's quite a well-known actor today, not in England but overseas, who had this capacity. You know what they're like, their knees jog when they're talking to you, they're bursting with energy and they want to express themselves in 100 different ways. These are the types that are susceptible to psychic attack. His father had died. He was only a young man then, say 24. His father had died, and he became interested in the esoteric and soon became aware that somebody was trying to communicate with him. And people are flattered when that happens. And generally, so long as you don't surrender your consciousness, it's pretty harmless. If you are a person that is a little elusive, a little ethereal in your consciousness, maybe you are more susceptible. But generally speaking, so long as you retain your consciousness, there's not much harm done. It's when the consciousness begins to fade, to thin, and is lost altogether that psychic possession, psychic attack can reach the stage of psychic possession. In the case of this youngster, he believed that it was his father trying to reach him, and he sat down, would sit down when this happened, and take down messages. He's still alive today. If you ever meet him, he may tell you about it. He would take down message after message and after message. Some of them would add up, and some of them he'd scrub out immediately and laugh or giggle. And sometimes this could occupy him for quite a period of time. And inevitably, the questions put to him by this entity who was giving him automatic writing, if you like, was turned towards who he was taking out and whether the one being taken out was being approved of, and so on and so on. So the matter of automatic writing needs to be looked at very carefully. Some people are just susceptible to it. They can sit down and automatically write, as we say. Well, it needs a careful look at it. The next thing that is likely to startle you in the field of psychic self-defense is the matter of nightmares and night terrors. Nightmares and night terrors. Of course, we see them in children quite frequently. Nightmares, night terrors, also less important things like sleepwalking by kids, crying out at night, and so on. The nightmare is a fright reaction which occurs during sleep. I'm going to read 5 or 6 lines from a clinical disorders of children book about the nightmare, because you must distinguish it from the night terror. It's a fright reaction during sleep. And in the nightmare, the child awakens in terror from a dream, usually characterized by a feeling of suffocation and helplessness. He can ordinarily relate his bad dream. He is well-oriented and can recognize people around him, and he can be calmed readily. Not nearly as difficult as the night terror that we're going to consider in a moment. Nightmares are often very vivid, and the memory of them, accompanied by a sense of dread, sometimes recurs the following day when the child is awake. They are not uncommon and generally take place within an hour or two of going to bed. That's all. I'm going to give you the cause of the condition. The cause of the condition is that the child's astral body has been too long detached from the physical. The out-of-body experience that the child was having in the sleep or the dream state, not the content of the dream too much, the length of the out-of-body state has been too long. And the sense of suffocation and helplessness is the struggle of trying to get back into the physical body. And so the way that you deal with this in a child is to not allow the child, while they are young, they all grow out of it eventually, don't allow the child to sleep, go into a heavy sleep and sleep for too long. Have some reason to go in and turn them over and shorten the period. Turning them over will bring the astral body back into alignment very quickly. Very rare for adults to have nightmares, but they are occasionally had. Now consider the matter of night terror, in which a child awakes screaming with fright, and won't be consoled, continues even though they're only semi-conscious. You can't console them, you can't calm them. You never see this after puberty. After puberty, the condition dies out. And the cause is usually an anxiety neurosis, which doesn't mean just anxiety. Anxiety neurosis means the child has had something taken away from it. It could have been the comfort of one of its parents. It could have been rowing of the parents, which takes all the comfort away. I always say when people ask me whether they should leave their husbands or break the marriage up when they have children, they ask me, should I stop the marriage? What about the children? My answer to that is always quite clear. Are you fighting in front of the children? And they think carefully, and if they are, that's an indication that that marriage must be terminated or that a separation must occur. The worst thing that you can do to children is to set or to allow the parents to attack each other, because that attack takes on psychic implications as well. And so generally it is something taken away from the child. There is something there that has left an unpleasant result. Sometimes it takes the role of bedwetting, or there's bullying at school, and so you remove the cause. Now I'm going to give you an instance of this. Two little boys who were twins grew up, and the one was absolutely normal and a very balanced boy, and the other, the twin, was very susceptible to night terrors. And it got so bad that they had to be locked in their room at night. The windows had to be locked, bolted and secured, and the door of the bedroom locked. And worse than anything, the level-headed of the two, his name was Alf, the level-headed of the two had so become sensitized to the behavior of his brother that when there was the slightest movement of his brother, who would leap out of bed and run for the door, that he could tackle him. He could whip out of bed himself and tackle his brother before any harm was done, and hold him down until something could be done about it. I looked into this matter, and I found that the mother was a racing enthusiast. She was a racing enthusiast, which meant that she went to the races frequently, each week almost, and she had a coterie of people who came to her at the race meeting for tips and for consultations and so on, and were very demanding and rough, and the little boy had had experience of these individuals in ordinary waking consciousness with his mother, but had also seen them in his dreams, and they terrified him, and he was rushing to his mother's side to give assistance. But of course, these matters are always forgotten. There is amnesia about the cause of the condition. Now, those two, nightmares and night terrors, are worth remembering if you have anything to do with children. Of course, parents give not just support to their children in terms of encouragement, telling them stories, helping them to dress, hearing their problems and so on. But there is a definite contribution by parents to the child's aura. The mother contributes constantly to the child's aura. She constantly contributes emotional energy and substance to the child's growing astral body. The child is going to have to grow that astral body and integrate it right up until the age of 14, 15, 16, this difficult period around puberty. But the father also contributes, especially if it is a boy. The father should contribute his own material to the child's aura. But this natural contribution should not become oppressive. Very frequently, the emotional cocooning of a child can place that child in a dangerous situation. They don't want to strike out on their own. If the father lives abroad and is not present, then there isn't this desire of the child to copy the father, to want to strike out on his own and become a train driver or a milkman or a doctor or a dentist as his father is. And there is excessive cocooning. The danger comes when this protection becomes a menace, and the boy, especially the boy, shares the aura of the mother, Even when he is reaching adulthood, that sharing continues. And there is the chance that the boy could be, as a result of this, if not in his DNA formula, can become gay by this particular process. Not that there's anything wrong with being gay, but the fact that it is imposed under a regime of a possessive mother is the difficulty, because the boy will never throw that off completely. Astral attack comes in strange ways. I once taught children in an East End school as part of my natural development. And if you know anything about school life in the East End, you'll know that it can sometimes be total uproar from the time that classes start until the end of the day. On one occasion, I was teaching on a floor and had to keep the doors of 2 other classes open because of the pandemonium that was going on and the misbehavior. On one occasion, I was called in to try and restore control in this particular classroom. And there was a little girl there who was attacking the teacher, the woman teacher, and was getting the best of the deal. And it was a very unpleasant situation. I rushed in and, all right, I shouted at her, called her name, and she turned round and screamed at me. And when she screamed, it was just as if somebody had taken a knife and was thrusting it in and out of my gallbladder here. I've always had trouble with gall conditions, with gallbladder conditions. And I suppose it was the weakest part of the body that is the most susceptible. And it was a real experience in waking consciousness, and it felt like a knife thrust going in and out. Always look in your books, especially the books that are written for you by esoteric leaders, for hints. Look also for blinds. Look also for cover-ups. There are many things that need to be watched carefully. If you read Leadbeater's works and some of the other works, you'll find mention of the spleen chakra. Now, the spleen itself is an organ about the size of the fist, and it's shaped like the fist, and it's found just there under the borders of the ribs on the left rib cage. And Leadbeater talks about the spleen chakra being receptive, the only chakra in the body that is openly receptive to direct entry of prana. Not coming in, energy coming in just through the prana being attached to the oxygen molecule when we breathe, but directly into the chakra. Well, the spleen chakra is a blind. Where you read spleen, you should read sacral, sexual chakra. And the sexual chakra, the sacral chakra, is open to direct stimulation. And that event that I mentioned from Rom Lando's book about the woman affected when Gurdjieff stared at her and breathed in a strange way is an example of the susceptibility of the spleen to be aroused in that way. Festivals are always a place for wearing T-shirts. Everybody loves to wear a T-shirt. And lately the T-shirts have become, as it were, a place for New Age art to be depicted. And a lot of paint and design is put onto a T-shirt, sometimes back and front. The danger is when the T-shirt is treated in this way in an area that overlies the heart chakra, where a T-shirt is heavily painted or daubed or whatever the method. This is usually a great inhibition to the functioning of the heart chakra, because while it is true to say that the sacral center is a receiver for direct prana, it usually implies that when the sacral center is being used, the heart chakra cannot be. But when the disciplines take us to chakras above the diaphragm, then the heart is one of the first to be affected. And the using of any garment with materials that involve paint or oils, crude or otherwise, can inhibit the intake of energy into the heart. And especially if it is in the back, on the back of the t-shirt, in the space between the scapulars, there is a tremendous intake of energy through what we would call wings, the wings of the angel. These, in terms of humanity, are intake areas for energy coming into a region which I have called the intrascapular area, where there is a chakra that links up with the heart in front. So watch out for your t-shirts. I wear a t-shirt with a design on, it's the Om, and the design is placed up here. Quite innocuous there, but never there, never in the center of the chest, overlying the heart chakra. There are ways in which you can protect yourself quite easily if the circumstances are reasonably ordinary. It is good to be able to do your exercises, your meditation, in a condition in which you are clothed, but the clothing is of a special kind, and you should then underneath it be naked. The best garment of all to wear is a loose flowing garment, which means there's plenty of space in the wrist holes, as it were, where there is lots of spare material all around the body, where the garment flows longer than the length of the body, and therefore you can tuck yourself in completely. Whether you're seated on the floor or in a chair, you can completely contain yourself within the garment. It can have a cowl, which means you can pull it down over the face with a hood. The kind of material that I used to use was crepe material, and crepe means that the surfaces bubbled slightly. Perhaps some of you here can give a better description of it. In my day it was called crepe de chine, and the material had bubbles on it instead of a straight, smooth surface. That is not as good as crepe. I used to use a dark blue because it was the color of my soul ray, and more than 60% of you here today have souls vibrating on the ray of love wisdom, whose color is indigo, the sky, the color of the sky at night. And so you sit or lie or whatever you do and wrap the garment around you, leaving no area exposed if you feel that you are susceptible to attack. The classical posture that is adopted is Padmasana. Very few Westerners can seat themselves in Padmasana, but it is a very compact asana and very easy to wrap. Always remember that there is one breath, as my students here tonight well know I teach frequently, that can help you when you are under attack, astrally or openly. The beauty of the breathing exercise is that if you practice it each day, you are able to use it in the astral world when you are out of body. And it will immediately draw forces into you which will negate any kind of attack, any conceivable kind of attack in the astral world. We'll consider that towards the end of the talk if there is time, but I'm sure we can have it at question time anyway. Yes, when you're under attack, there are some old methods that can be called up straight away. It's a good idea to take a deep breath when you're angry, when you've been provoked. beyond the point of endurance, it's a good remedy to take a deep breath, and then in the pause, counting up to 10 if you like, nothing wrong with that at all, and in that pause of counting to 10 to consider your next action. But in that interim period of counting to 10, the deep breath will help you. You see, the nature of the human aura decides in the end as to whether you are susceptible to attack, or whether you yourself can use your own capacities to attack. You have seen that we all give off an aura, the effluent of our various bodies, the effluent being astral, the effluent being a little etheric as well, and the totality of all these effluents, including the mental effluent, is that we possess an aura. And the aura itself is a globule. It's discrete. If it isn't discrete, by that I mean that it has its borders, it has its own natural integration and capacity to act as a single entity. It is discrete and it rotates. The aura rotates. And so you can say that, generally speaking, the rotation is clockwise. It is clockwise, and the rotation speed is about 7 times a minute. 7 times a minute. Now you can easily judge that by rotating a finger, if it's clockwise, as it should be for northern latitudes. You can easily make the finger go at the speed of about 7 times a minute. If the speed is faster, it usually indicates emotional upset. It means that there is instability emotionally. People show instability emotionally in various ways. The classical way is the wet hand. When you shake the person's hand, it's soaking wet or clammy. It's an indication that the astral body is disturbed. The aura can rotate very quickly, and that will be an indication of emotional instability. But actual attack occurs or coincides with the aura jolting, with it twitching, as it were. It may go back a little as it goes round, or pause. And that can be very disturbing for people who are around you. And I don't know what you can judge from that. It's something that needs perceiving, and you should be alert to it, the jerkiness of a person's aura. There is now something else that we should consider carefully, and that is the nature of what we have inherited on this planet. My students certainly know that I give warning that through conditions totally unrelated to each of us as individuals, we have inherited not just a difficult karma for our planet, but we have inherited what we might call a planetary dweller, a planetary dweller. All of us can be divided, rather, all of us can divide our energies into two. The diaphragm, as you know, separates the thoracic cage with the lungs from the intestines of the abdomen. The diaphragm, a sheet of muscle which partakes in breathing. Spiritual unfoldment is a process in which we take energies out of the chakras below the diaphragm into chakras above the diaphragm. And the moment that we are able to do that, we're not only taking a safe course of unfoldment, but we are assisting in the dispelling of forces that most of us put together to make up what is known as the dweller. The dweller occurs as a result of the contributions of your astral bodies from many lives back. We do not come into incarnation clean. We pick up with our new vehicles, with our new astral bodies, we pick up the remnants of the emotional nature left behind in the last life. And sometimes the contribution of lost lives, astral forms, can be quite considerable. And we, of course, have the emotional energies related to these centers below the diaphragm, often very sexual, often very desirous and attaching and demanding, especially material things. And so many people walk around, we see it comedy-wise, often stressed that people walk around in a fuzz. And it is very true from a psychological point of view that people do carry around part of this dweller. And it is contributed to from the planetary dweller of our own planet Earth. The history of the planetary dweller is this, that life began to form on the moon very much earlier than it formed on the Earth. And in forming on the moon, it expressed itself through creatures of very low origin, such as we have in our lower kingdoms. But on the moon, these had very special qualities about them, and that would have been fine, except that the life on the moon was destroyed. It was just like a young man or young woman being killed in an accident. It was a cosmic accident. And the life on the moon was transferred into the embryonic form of the Earth. The Earth was only just beginning to put itself together, being a much greater mass of material. And the earliest forms of the Earth were really constituting only the embryo of the one life, the planetary life that was going to occupy it. And so when, under a cosmic accident, fairly advanced life on the moon was cut short, the effect of it was that their astral forms, their astral material, plant, animal, and the almost human stage that did develop on the moon, this totality of astral substance, planetary substance of the moon, was shifted to the Earth. And it still exists in our Earth globe at this time. It is the cause, the main cause of crime waves. It is the main cause of the tendency towards cruelty, the tendency towards love of hunting, the tendency to demand expression of these chakras below the diaphragm, rather than the opening of chakras above the diaphragm, with all that that implies. Not attaching love, not sexually demanding love, of the solar plexus area and the sacral center. But the non-attaching love, the platonic love of the heart chakra is what is required. And what holds the masses of mankind back is this mass dweller. Now, each of us have part of us embedded in this scourge of the planet. It was impossible to talk about matters like this 30 years ago. For me, I've had to try testing it out on audiences, as I do my own group. But the concept is very real indeed. When you realize what mankind has done in 4 or 5 or 6 million years of its life, the planet Earth was a planet, like many others, red in tooth and claw. Species lived off each other, tore each other to pieces. Mankind barely survived the onslaught of all kinds of pests and creatures and monsters on the earth. And I'm talking about some of the worst of the mammals and so on. And this has gone on and on and on and on for 500 million years. And suddenly man appears in the last 4 or 5 or 6 million years. And the effect of this is to reveal extraordinary qualities that exist in animals that had until then given themselves over to a struggle for survival on the planet. And the extraordinary thing is that animals have got this natural love in them. You can take a wild animal and train it to live with a natural enemy. And all animals have this quality of love with wisdom in them, just as it is in us. And in 4 million years, we have begun to reverse this whole tendency of nature to survive by tearing each other to pieces. And we must expect and understand that there is this psychic quality, this fuzz, if you wish, of tendencies to maintain nature in tooth and claw, lying below the diaphragm instead of movement into regions above the diaphragm. Now, in terms of you and I and others, this can be no problem at all. If we have had such an upbringing, had such spiritual training, that these matters, the horror of these expressions, has been taken care of, is no longer existent, then this hovering part of us, which we owe to our ancient origins, sometimes on the moon, sometimes from the earth only, these ancient origins form a dweller. And when people come under psychic attack, ladies and gentlemen, the chances are, if they are under psychic attack, that they are under attack from the elements that they have created, from this awful, overshadowing, long-standing, inherited fuzz. It's hard to describe it. It's why we have to write books about it, because it's almost impossible to describe it in lectures, classes, at all. And so let us take an example of how such a dweller develops in a person. The person is frightened. Fear often is the basis of psychic attack. A person has an alcoholic father. When the father comes home, he is unruly, degrading, violent, disgusting. The girl hears a noise at the front door. It's late at night. Immediately there is this inborn or inward carried fear of the father, the alcoholic father. Immediately the concept, the visual outline of the father battering at the door or struggling with the lock to get in, and what is likely to follow thereafter. The person has created a mental concept of the father. Really, it is a mental matrix of the father at the door and what is likely to happen. The emotional result of this is that an astral form made up from your astral body of the lowest materials begins to take the shape of the father or the spider or whatever fear that there is grounded within that individual when it is aroused. When it is not aroused, the problem lessens and lessens. But this structure here, once created, will tend to absorb the emotional, astral, emotional hemorrhaging of the individual during the fear state. And so they develop this structure which likes to anchor itself, tend to anchor itself at the back of the neck, really on the vertebra between the scapula, the shoulder blades. And it can be aroused very easily. Spiritual unfoldment, of course, is to take these energies to the higher chakras, which is indicated in the science of yoga. But for initiation to grow tremendously through the assistance of extra systemic forces is in what we call initiation, graded initiation assisted by extra systemic forces. In order to undertake that, this dweller has to be faced up to. You have created it. Your fears have created it. Your fears enliven it. Your anger, your sorrow, your grief, anything which is attaching enlivens it. And in the path of spiritual unfoldment, when you would have the solar angel, which is the representation of the sun and not the planet Earth or moon in you, when your solar angel needs building up, you must face up to the dweller. And you do, you face it. You banish fear from your life. If you want a confrontation with a dweller, call on it. I created you and I destroy you. You will get nothing from me. I will not fear this matter that has torn me apart for years. I will not fear it again. And so we talk about this dweller on the threshold. Oscar Wilde wrote a book about it. He wrote a book about it, The Picture of Dorian Gray. The entity within him, without him, about him, that was aroused every time he did anything disgusting or filthy or passion-ridden and so on. Read Bulwer Lytton's book Zanoni, who was the first person to conjure up or give label to this extraordinary matter of man's dweller. But we have to live in the world. We have to go to work. We have to face up to the problems of everyday life and the problems of lacking energy and so on. And so we are always asking for ways in which we can restabilize ourselves. We fear all kinds of things that threaten our secure material existence because we are human and we have personalities. And there are things that threaten our personalities. I can only tell you that there are certain structures which can be adopted in your daily life. There is nothing wrong with prayer. Nothing wrong with prayer. We tend to look askance at it today because of the mess that religions have made of sacred teachings. Look into 3 factors which you can employ in your daily life that can banish fear, that can wage a war of attrition against this astral entity, your dweller on the threshold. If I were a Sufi, I would have perhaps 3 others. But these are absolutely tried and tested, and you shouldn't feel ashamed of them. The Lord's Prayer has been said by millions and millions for a long, long time indeed. It exists as a structure with its archetypes in the precincts of our planet. It constitutes a great reservoir of energy. And the only way that you can get anything out of the psychic life, the spiritual life, is to put something into it. And prayer is a very easy way to put into your inner components the energies and materials that it can release to you. The Lord's Prayer. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me unto the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. It's not that I don't know these things. I know them and I use them, and I use them with respect. And you can do exactly the same. They will consolidate. These prayers will consolidate what you gain. You may be lucky to have had a good meditation. Consolidate that meditation with prayer. You are a much stronger person if you have said your prayers. It's nothing to do with devotion. It's nothing to do with conscience. It's just an occult practice. And occult means that you use the hidden forces of nature. And there are great reservoirs of energy there that can be released to you in what we call archetypes. And the archetype of prayer is one method that you can use. The third one is the great invocation. And it is a structure that takes solar forces from the point of light within the mind of God. Let light stream forth into the minds of men, and you visualize it. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men, and so on. The great invocation each day. There are 1 million people saying it. You can link up with them. And in so doing, you can begin to build for humanity the antakarana that links man's personality with his higher self, his spiritual self. And we have to build this bridge, the antakarana. And by our daily spiritual actions, by doing the things I've just suggested, you can build this bridge until the energies of the higher self pour torrentially down into you. And you can forget psychic attack. You can forget it. The moment that you begin to undertake in all sincerity the esoteric techniques of soul development, spiritual development, you can forget worrying about your spiritual unfoldment. It's a tremendous load taken from your back. Don't worry about yourselves. If you're giving yourself to humanity, if you are involved in esoteric disciplines, they will ensure that the solar angel, which is the higher part of you, will begin to enter your life. And of course, never forget the Om. I'm not going into the subject of the Om, but the Om is a very important mantra. Sound it whenever you can. If you feel under attack, walk to the top of a hill. The effect of exercise will produce an oxygenation in you. You will want to breathe more deeply because it has been imposed on you by the exercise you are doing of walking up the hill. And you will oxygenate your body and you will fill it with prana. The chakras will teem with prana. And then at the top of the hill, you don't have to worry about anybody. You can sound your Om to the heart's content. Ah, right down as low as you can get it. Ah, oh, as high and as far as you can get it. The whole range of vocal expression. And it's very, very powerful indeed. Medical science has yet got to discover that the best therapy for shock can frequently be the ability to make sounds during shock. The groans, the utterances are nature's way of expressing shock that may have come as trauma from some event in your life. This is a field that has yet to be developed. I myself have adapted in my own life 45 years of active spiritual struggle. I have adapted many mantras for my own use. I can be confronted. I can be confronted with individuals who are never going to ever learn in this life. You can do what you like. You can talk about anything, and it won't affect them in the slightest bit. They're closed, and you leave them to God. And there are others that just a little more effort, and they open up. When I see somebody opening up, I can turn away by myself, sometimes it's heard by others, and say these words as that person, to me, can be seen expanding, opening up his arms, as it were. The light of God was on his face, his gates were open wide, and all who would might enter there, and no one was denied. Adapted from something, yes, but those words, for me, are tremendously powerful, and I know that that person is receptive for the end of his days. I'm no different to you. I have not had an immaculate conception. And you'll hear me, I know certainly people around me have heard me say this. When you're confronted with somebody who's closed, like that, never going to get anywhere with them. And I say to myself, rolled around an earth's diurnal frame. A person that's just like a dice tossed around in the box before it's going to be thrown, has no say, doesn't want to know about anything outside of his own miserable circumstances, rolled around by the earth, within the earth's frame. And for me, being thoroughly English, even though raised abroad, for me, the legend of Arthur is always the one that I know to be the most reliable, especially when it comes to the harsh factors of psychic attack. And I'm encouraged when I read poetry. I'm encouraged by the words, by the way in which they framed and rhyme, and so on. And when I think of Arthur, I think of Morte Arthur, Tennyson's lovely poem, epic poem, and the depths that Arthur reaches. He is mortally wounded. He's carried down by Sir Bedivere to the lakeside, and there 3 queens with crowns of gold receive Arthur, desperately hurt, and take him onto a barge, and the barge is going to take him to immortality. And if I think of difficulties that have happened, setbacks, failures, and we all have them, I think of these words from Morte Arthur, describing him lying there. So like a shattered column lay the king, not like that Arthur who, with lance and rest, from spur to plume a star of tournament, shot through the lists at Camelot, and charged before the eyes of ladies and of kings. And you can reverse moods with poetry. And when you call on the great archetypes of your nation, which is after all the body of a great cosmic being trying to express itself, you can draw on power and compassion of immense proportions. When somebody is depressed and I can't do much for them, I always send them a copy of my tape, Courage and Cowardice. I recommend it as a therapeutic unit for those who are under psychic attack. And it is a very useful tape indeed. Arthurian legend, you know, possesses wonderful imagery for those who want to defend themselves against psychic attack. And these things are so easy to call up in your mind. And the one part of the legend that I recommend people call up is the sword embedded in the stone. The sword embedded in the stone. There's the sword. It has a handle, of course, and it is embedded in the stone. Most people are a sword embedded in the stone. Most people are not free, totally free, to do the spiritual things that their higher self demands of them. We all need to be free. We need to be drawn from the stone of our attachments. And we need to make ourselves into a sword that has 2 edges, and the 2 edges need to be sharpened. There is the edge that we use in the world to deal with material matters, with the daily demands of everyday living. The sharp edge of a psychosynthesized personality is wonderful, but only because that personality can not only deal with matters in the outer world with courage and overcome them, but that other blade, that second blade, can be used inwardly in the inner worlds to fight there for humanity, for the spiritual good of man, as we say. What wonderful imagery there is here. And you know, the inner worlds are gained only through imagery. Release, the freeing. The element of freeing through releasing the sword. the wielding of the sword. You make your sword into a sharpened, useful thing and hand it to the higher self. Take me, here I am. I'm sharp on both edges. Take me up, I'm free, and use me where you will. Then you'll see results come into your life, pour in, when you begin to use such imagery effectively. And the wielding of the sword is the symbol of service. The sharpening of the blade is the symbol of making yourself an effective instrument. And giving it to the higher self, or to the master, or to whoever it is you address your highest thoughts to, is the symbol of submission and a tossing away of your own little ego. And the sword and the stone is really the soul's purpose for everyone. People are always saying, oh, what is my soul's purpose? Yes, but what is my soul's purpose? We dismiss far too many things that point to the soul's purpose. You know, there are lots of little ways which you can strengthen yourselves. You've heard of the odic force, a fluid supposed to pour from the fingertips. You should learn to exercise the fingers in a special way so that that odic force can stream from your fingers and you can work more effectively in the world. Pulling on the fingers and rotating on them is a very excellent exercise for opening up the blocked streams that the fingers represent for the outpouring of your aura. Whether it's in the work that you're doing or the healing hands that you lay onto anybody, pull and twist. And you can feel as you do that the immense outpouring of energy that comes from the fingers. Always remember there are naturally invisible hierarchies using the planet. That's their natural work. They're there. And you have to accept them because you're living on the planet and your spiritual unfoldment is part and parcel of the planet. There are invisible hierarchies of life and form using our planet. Some are descending into denser and denser shape and form. Some are rising out of dense shapes and forms, like us, taking on subtler and subtler forms and vehicles to express themselves. And the two together are intermingled, as we know so well from our famous symbol of the Caduceus. Forms moving down into material shape and forms moving up out of material shape, and always the wand of life between the two, the Caduceus as the great symbol of these processes. And Dion Fortune said this, and I've added to it a little. She said, there are beings that live in the invisible worlds as fish live in the sea. There are men and women with trained minds who can enter it as a diver would descend to the ocean bed. There are divers that can bring up pearls of wisdom from the ocean bed. There are also times when the sea's dikes break, where invisible forces flow in upon us and swamp our lives. Anyone in a state of depression is in a low-lying land subject to swamping. and what I have tried to present to you here today, of ways in which you can overcome these depressing states. Never expect to be in touch with God consistently all your life. Anybody who says that is lying. It is not the nature of spiritual unfoldment to be in close contact with the divine all the time. Contact with the divine is periodic, and you must be able to accept alienation from the divine just as well, equally, as you can accept identification with the divine, because that's what that is all about again. Identification, alienation, identification, alienation. What is different in each part of the sine waves is growth in consciousness. All of us are frontiersmen. You have chosen this period in human history to incarnate. You are on the edge of a new millennium. Don't expect it to be easy. Put up with some of the easier factors that disturb you in your life, but call on the higher self to reach you when those factors seem unbearable. I was in Italy not so long ago talking to a group of youngsters in a yoga club, and all of them seemed terribly dedicated. They'd all given up something in their lives and were looking for rewards because they had given something up. One guy had given up most of his time to spiritual exercises, and he'd lost his girlfriend because she thought that he was not interested in her any longer. And so it went on around a group of them. And there happened to be on the table at the time some roses, and one particular rose, it was this one this morning, there was a particular rose thrusting its bud out, and I said to the first of them, I said, look at that rosebud closely. Tell me, what's happening to it? And he thought, well, I must impress. And he said, well, it's very beautiful. It smells nice, it looks nice. I said, have a close look at it. So he looked again, and I said, look at the tip of the rosebud. Look at it. And he suddenly got the message that where the rosebud is beginning to open, where the bud has swollen and pointed itself, cells are being torn to pieces, are being shredded by the great impact, the demand of the rosebud to expand its consciousness, if you like, into an open flower. Humanity is like that. Look back in the last 50 years and see how we've grown. We've evolved instruments of power like computers. A computer that can do the work of 2,000 people, only in the last 30 years or so. A whole political system that was brought in through bloodshed and assassination, and which threatened to dominate the world, has been put aside without bloodshed. And there have been changes there politically and internationally and so on. Change, as the rosebud must change into the blooming flower, and then is able to give out its aroma to fill the whole room, whereas previously it had only occupied that amount of the room. And the color, the delight of all who see it from many, many yards away. If you think you're getting nowhere, take a look at a field of beetroot, anything you like. And it's the same, acre after acre after acre. But suddenly, somewhere amongst it, there is something flowering. It's that catches the gaze, not the acres and acres of sameness of beetroot. And there in the middle of the field, it pushes itself up, flowers, and attracts your attention. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we should have a moment of question time. Is that permitted?
Yeah.
All right, questions. I'll try and do what I can. I have obviously not been able to do all I had hoped to today, but we will come again with a second further lecture on this extraordinary subject. Please go if you want to. Questions, quickly.
When you were saying about the hell state.
Speak up, the whole audience is listening to
You
you.
were saying about the hell state, and I was thinking about Hitler. I don't know why, but
I was speaking about what?
the hell state.
The hell state, yes.
Yes,
And Hitler.
Yes.
Well, I would look at Hitler today after 50 years when I was mortally wounded twice, battling against him. I look at Hitler now and say, well, at least he did destroy the slums in the East End of London. And even if we didn't take up the advantage immediately, it helped to change things in Britain. Yes, I remember those days, as very few of you do, what enthusiasm that nation began to put together, having survived 20 years of devaluation. You had to take a wheelbarrow and wheel your money to the bakery to pick your loaf of bread up. That was what money was worth in Germany in those days. And so the country had become degraded. It had focused itself on a point of hope. We should not now look back with such disgust onto the elements that have produced a better world. I have no love of Hitler or any of his tribe. In fact, it was a great glory for me after the war to begin to feel my way around astral projection and to go into the astral world there and see the demise of Nazism in the astral world. How these grey devils were still there strutting it around with goose-stepping and Nuremberg rallies, but each time, each year that went by, they were weaker and weaker and weaker, and eventually the very last remnants of the Third Reich fizzled out in the astral world as well. Questions?
Dr. Baker, is the author of The Light of God was on his face, is it Blake?
Author of? Sorry.
Of The Light of God was on his face.
No, it's an adaptation that I have made through the years of the great song. Is it Jerusalem or?
It's the second verse of Jerusalem.
Yeah, something like that. It's an adaptation of it.
Thank you.
And you just get that feeling that when you've spent an hour talking to somebody and giving them illustrations and images, and you think, oh, I'm getting nowhere. And then you get a sudden feeling and you look at them and you know that they have changed, that from then on they're going to be receptive not to the forces below the diaphragm but to the solar angel above the diaphragm. The light of God was on his face, his gates were open wide, and all who could might enter there, and no one would be denied.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming along this evening.